I want to introduce our Assistant Superintendent of Instruction, who has to make it all happen. She's going to be our moderator, Mrs. Elena Toscano.
I have the talking stick for a few minutes, and I feel that I just have been sitting here listening today and thinking, and it actually bared itself out in our breakout session earlier, perception of that we are a high wealth district because we live in this incredible valley that people come to for the amazing wine, spas, hotels, and so forth. There actually is a secret, those of you who are staying here. If you turn on the hot water faucet very slowly, out comes the red wine. If you turn on the cold water faucet very slowly, out comes the white wine. And if you turn them both just at the same time, you get rosé. And so you can try that when you get back to your room tonight. But seriously, we are an interesting dichotomy in the perception of the folks that come to our valley. We have 18,000 students, as you've heard, 29 schools. We have 19 elementary schools, used to have 24. Things have changed in the last few years relative to downsizing. 5 middle schools, 5 high schools, and we count our continuation high school as one of those because it also is doing project-based learning and seeing great success with its students. But we are classified as a low wealth district. That's a surprise to some people. We're basic revenue limit funding. We have negotiated with our labor force of about, I don't know, what is it, 1,500, 2,000 folks. 7 furlough days. We took 5 fewer teaching days, and everyone also gave up 2 non-student days. So we're a Me Too district. We say Me Too because we always sink or swim together. Managers, teachers, our classified folks, everybody, we either all take a raise, it's the same percent, or no one gets it and we all take the same cut. We're interest-based problem solving, so we really do believe deeply in collaboration, which is one of those 4 C's. We had 11% special ed. Patrick said 41% on free and reduced. I'm going to give you some data, and I don't have a PowerPoint, so I'm just doing this to kind of set a little bit of stage for a commentary in a minute here. 21% of our students are currently classified as English learners. 24% used to be English learners. 45% of our students, thank you. So it's 45% of our students are or were. And we're very proud of that, fact that our redesignation rate is last year was almost 17% compared to 11% in the state. You don't get credit for that under current accountability. It's not one of the metrics that someone has identified as important, but we think it's a really critical thing for folks to realize. Of our 1,100 graduates, we had 389 that completed A to G last year, 35%. A few years ago, it was about 27%. We're not where we want to be yet, but we're moving in the right direction. And we actually did that, initiated that a few years ago with a partnership with Ed Trust West, who said, this is what you need to do, this is where you need to go. And I'm going to bring that back in a minute. Our 1-year dropout rate, 3.4%. I like that one very much. I don't like the four-year dropout rate because I don't like the way it's calculated, but it was 13.7%. Now, data by itself, and I'm sitting next to a statistician here, and she's, talk about data queen, she really wears the crown. By itself doesn't give you any information. The state 4-year dropout rate was 17.4%. So when you talk about a, high dropout rate, well, we'd like it to be lower over 4 years, but compared to the state, we're not so bad. Our rate the prior year was 18.5%. That's something to celebrate. So I'm just telling my folks here in the audience because we're all from kindergarten on to high school working very hard to make that happen. Okay, what are our demographics? 2% Asian, 6% Filipino, 50% Latino, 34% white. In 1993, and I started here in 1987, we were 20% Latino, 72% white. So why am I sharing all this with you? Because I want you to understand the context of the shift, the demographic shift that's happened in this valley as more vineyards were planted, as more hotels have opened, as more spas and restaurants have been created. It brought into our district a workforce. And over time, what's happened is our demographic shift is moving up through our school system. In 2002, our district API was 677. Now it's 778. That's a growth of 101 points. We're proud of that. We're growing in spite of our demographics changing. People need to celebrate that. Thank you. in 2002, we had 32% of our kids proficient or advanced on the CST and language arts, 34% in math. We're now at 55% English language arts, 58% in math. And remember, the demographics are shifting. More English learners, 60% coming to us not speaking English, and they're born here. So our gap in 2002, we had a Latino API of 551, it's now 718. That was a 167-point growth. Highest growth since then. Our white API back then was 749, it's now 843. Well, darn it, if we could have held that white subgroup and not put in systems that made a change for all of our learners, our gap would have only now been 31 points. But we have a gap that was 198, it's now 125. So what's been the reward for us for all this improvement, except for the pats we give ourselves on the back and the innovations we're putting in our systems? Well, we were labeled program improvement. We were given district sanctions. And the Group Ed Trust West that worked for us, if you look us up on the internet, as some folks like to do when they come and learn about districts, say, well, how are they doing with all this innovation? Ed Trust West, our partners, just gave us a D on closing the achievement gap. Now, those of you who know me have seen a little bit of one side of my personality every so often. I'm Italian, Genovese, and I wrote them a rather interesting email, and I said, shame on you. They gave us a D based on 1 year's scores on the CST, 1 year. So when we talk about changing the accountability system, it's really important because the perception over time in the community needs to change. Let me just read a couple of comments. Yesterday, Mark was on the front page of the Register above the fold. We like it when it's good news about this conference. And it was a great article, and I got online and I read the blogs, and my former superintendent said, Elena, never read the blogs, because he knows what it does to my blood pressure. And here's what one person said: why are people coming here? Is Napa Valley a good educational example? I've heard our schools are substandard and even have test scores below state level with abysmal graduation rates. A recent NVR article said, that's our paper, school administrators say our schools are deficient in technology infrastructure. Second comment, good grief. Just reading this article completely explains why these kids are dropping out. These educators don't have a clue. That's you guys, that's us. So we're trying to do all things. We've got a Napa 2015 plan. It's up on our website, talks about our vision. And I like the phrase Disney uses a lot, Imagineering. I think Visioneering goes along with that. We think we're headed in the right direction. We have a project-based learning initiative. How are we doing this with decreasing funds? We've got great community partners. And this morning, Dr. Shao said something. He said, we need to expose our administrators to what is possible. And instead, we expose our leaders to what is typical. And I would just like to say we need to do that with our public. We need your help. We need to expose our community to what is possible. We need to not expose them to what is typical, because those are the kind of reactions that we're getting. So thank you for coming to Napa Valley. And with that, I'd like to turn the questions over to those of you in the audience that you may have for our panel. Step forward, please.
Larry and Mark, first, thank you for the work that you're doing in amazing, courageous leadership and preparing future generations and their impact on the world. So you're changing trajectories, and I thank you for that. My question is, what would you say to a school leader or a district leader who really likes the work that you're doing, but they're saying, I really would like to follow your model, but I can't because of the constraints that are being imposed on me? I would love kind of your thoughts and your advice on how I can make it happen.
Yeah, I think it's, thank you, great question. I think in these economic times and, being courageous is a little harder to do, right? So I think it's critical that on that hierarchy that I gave, that you get to culture in your community first. I mean, we really need community forums. What do we want our kids to be able to know and do? I mean, I think you really need to get the community totally engaged around the world has changed, and you got to do some education around that, and you have to have that. So I think that's critical. I think the other thing is I think boards and superintendents need cover. I mean, you know, guaranteed and viable, high-performing PLCs, everybody in the country is doing that. So, I mean, you can do that, right? But if you want to go down the road of, we want to do something more like what we've talked about today, we want to move the needle in a direction that gets our kids ready for the global economy. They're not competing against the kid next to them anymore. They're competing against everybody, and they have to be really good. If you really want to do that, I think you've got to get an umbrella over you, some sort of, you know, I love Ed Leader 21. I love Kincaid's work. It's great. It's helpful work, but it also gives us some cover. We're part of a national organization. The League of Innovative Schools, we're a very small district in that 30-district innovative national, but it gives Patrick and the board cover. I mean, we're part of something national that is really important. So I think that helps when you can do that.
Yeah, I have a couple of thoughts about that. One of them is that it's really a question of will more than anything else, I think. There are structural impediments. A couple of them are worth mentioning. I come from a district, there's someone else in this room who knows I do, back east, which is operating right now on $25,000 per kid, a public school district. And we're operating on $7,000 per kid. And it is one of the most concentrated academic nodes on the planet, that district. And what the people in that district don't know about what they're not getting for that money is breathtaking. Another structural one is that charter schools, public charter schools, are free of 80% of the education code of the state of California. I think all districts should come under the same mega waiver that we do, right? And having worked on the Perkins Act when I was an attorney for a while at the Harvard Center for Law and Education, we reauthorized Perkins, which comes from 1917, also known as ROP in this state. I hate to say this, but maybe this is consonant with something that my dear friend and role model, Young Zhao, has said earlier. You can't regulate to innovation. I've tried. I've really tried. So I don't quite feel comfortable in a large audience say I'm going to come from a total deregulation spectrum, because I feel in certain ways, like the environment, we really need it. But in education, I think we don't. I think we need to trust people a lot more. And as Einstein said, you know, not everything that can be counted counts, and not everything that counts can be counted. So that's what I would do.
Larry, about 10 years ago, I had a chance to see you guys when you were just getting started, or relatively new, down at Point Loma. Yeah. And I brought my elementary school leadership team over to a high school, and my superintendent's first comment was, "Why are you wasting time visiting a high school?"
Yeah.
And I think it was an honest question on his part, because the focus was on student achievement, and at that time the mantra was, we're going to be an 800 district, and that was where everybody was. Right. And I have to say, I was a little bit disappointed when I went to your school initially, because I thought I was going to see this, you know, remarkable work, and I saw people trying to figure things out. And then I was heartened, because as we talked amongst my leadership team, we decided that what was going to make you successful was what was going to make us successful: fidelity to a vision and to a purpose. And I think I heard Mark say that. And I've had a chance to stay connected to High Tech High School through Amy Rising for the last 10 years, and I've seen you guys build capacity over the years. So my question is, going back to a previous question, when you're in a conventional kind of district where pockets of innovation are happening, but there's a lot of pressure for performance, and there are a lot of opinions about what works, how do you keep that innovation moving forward, keep the leaders from shutting down just from the sheer criticism or just the sheer burden of trying to kind of meet all the, I mean, what are some suggestions? And that would be for the whole panel.
If that's me, I'll say, we still deal with that. Well, okay, thank you for, you saw us in our startup days, and and we're still learning, right? Like Michelangelo said at the end of his life. What I try, look, when we have a public exhibition, I'm showing you work that some teachers are doing that's really fantastic. I'm showing it because it's fantastic. I'm not showing work that's less than fantastic. And when there's 3,000 people packed in the building and they're all looking at work, it's like a friend of mine who runs a children's museum in another city. They measure the wear and tear on the carpet and smudges on glass to see which exhibits people are going to. We don't belittle a teacher whose work's not like that. They are looking at good quality work, and they're watching everyone looking at good quality work, and they're saying to themselves, we have a cycle of another exhibition coming up. Next time, my work's going to look more like that one. So what I'm doing in my schools is just what I would do if I were a superintendent. I would find my horses at the gate, and I would keep them running, and I'd give them more resources, and I'd give them more freedom. And if other people would say that's not fair, I'd say you do work like them, you're going to get the same thing. That's how I would do it. We should. That's when my 39-year-old was at a daycare center, a kid said something, and they made a mural of it. It was all these kids holding hands, and they said, "Let's hold hands and have a race." It's kind of sweet and silly, right?
You know, I think for us, it started with our board. Our board, you know, the reason I came back 3 years ago was the board went through a strategic planning process, and it led to a mission statement that was really compelling for me, that we wanted to instill 21st century skills in all kids and inspire lifelong learning. I mean, that hooked me. So when in our principal groups, one of the great things, Patrick's done a lot of great things, but he has really narrowed the initiatives to every principal writes a goal around how you're going to instill how you're going to instill the 4 C's in your school. And there's lots of ways to get there, but every principal's thinking about that. It's part of their evaluation. And then we created a learning walk protocol where we go to the really high-performing places that it's happening within our own district. We have some really amazing work happening around, you know, interdisciplinary, engaged learning environments where technology's driving it forward, and they're figuring it out. And they're figuring it out at the same time. The rest of the principals are coming in with teacher leaders and looking at it and figuring it out. So I think it starts with the board setting goals that are ambitious, that are doable, and then inspiring your leaders around that. I mean, our principals want to do this work. Our teachers want to do this work. We sometimes have to just clarify that it's okay to do it, you know, and that you can go down this road. And you know, somebody's not going to come in with a clipboard and say you're off track. You know, so I think some of it, I'd go back to the hierarchy, culture, get real clear messaging, and then really invest in your principal's ability to do it.
I also think that high schools should look like kindergartens. That's the other thing I would have said to your colleague.
Thanks. Hi, I'm a parent and I'm a board member in this education foundation. I love the school district, and so I want to just invite you to answer a question that I hear from a lot of my peers. I want to invite you to elaborate on hybrids or on merging combinations of differentiated instruction and collaboration, because sometimes it's like schizophrenia. We're talking over here about personalization of learning, then we're saying, no, we're actually all coming together and we're collaborating. So can you tell some juicy stories about how that works? Because you hear our demographics, and we want to inspire people to believe that this is going to work.
Well, I'll give you a juicy story about, too bad the camera's on, about my son who's at college, okay? So he was home when he was a sophomore from Cal, and he was home in October, and he was online watching Gilbert Strang's open source lectures on linear algebra from MIT. And talk about making it plain. I mean, Gilbert Strang is unique in his ability to explain linear algebra, okay? I said, how come you're doing that? He said, no one understands my professor's English in the class. Okay, so people stopped going. So here's a digital native who's enrolled in a university in linear algebra, takes the final exam and passes it, doesn't go to any classes, watches an asynchronous asset that's 3,000 miles away where it's iterated, and is in an informal study group with his peers. So which is the class? All of that is the class. I mean, the rest of us adults are far behind catching up with what they're already doing. That's my quick response.
One more question, Carlos?
Yeah, thank you. I have a question, and I just want to preface this by, I'm a professor at the college, and I teach actually the only Mexican-American studies right now in Napa. And I had a student who actually was sharing a story with us one time in one of our classes, and she said that she could remember that when she was in kindergarten here, she recalls that every time she left her door, her house, she was walking into the United States of America. And we carried her, you know, narrative throughout the entire semester, and just in understanding the disconnection between one's culture, you know, which she lives here, but her culture was in her home, and then stepping outside and feeling alienated in another culture. And so I guess my question is, and you know, I'm really interested in your school as far as being on the border, between two countries.
Correct.
About how can we create, in light of things that are going on, such as in Arizona, where they are decreating, they are actually deconstructing or diminishing ethnic studies courses, such as Mexican American studies courses. How can we create that to be part of the solution in things such as closing the achievement gap, but more importantly, to allow a huge population that's been here, as you said, even before 1848, to feel like when you walk out of your house, you're bringing your culture into the same culture that you live in, and that this hybrid or this, multicultural place that we live in, where they're feeling comfortable to do that. And so, that question is for all of you too.
My quick answer is some of the examples that you saw is basically bringing that in. And that's why I said the Jeffersonian tradition of the purpose of public education is to create a public, and so was E pluribus unum. And we had Plessy v. Ferguson in 1896, where the Supreme Court said separate but equal, and you have Brown versus Board in 54, in which they said together and equal, and we're less together and less equal than we were in 54, and the narrative is totally gone. As to what to do, there's these bizarre kind of notions going on of nativism and stuff like that. It's really troubling, and for all of us in public education. My dad, who passed away 2 years ago, was in World War II, and he told me so many times in my life, never complain about paying taxes. That was a great generation, and they built bridges, and they made parks, and they did all that stuff. And there's a lot of people like my dad who thought it was patriotic to pay taxes, and now we have a lot of people in this country who think it's patriotic not to pay taxes. So I don't have an easy answer, but I think that we are not in a very, as people said, we're in a very difficult time. And I've strayed a little bit from your thing, but it's larger than just that border. It's about what our role is in the world, and I think that's something that Young, of course, so brilliantly always captures in his conversation this morning. And I like to see our students. We are citizens of the United States, and I want to see us as citizens of the world. I just want to say one other thing about that. Okay, at High Tech High, we've had in the last 2 years self-invited. We have hosted the education ministries of China, Malaysia, Indonesia, Singapore, Taiwan, New Zealand, Australia, Netherlands, Denmark, Israel, Jordan, Kenya, South Africa, UK, Canada, Chile, Argentina, Mexico, and Brazil, and Japan is coming. In education, all of us are cooperating with each other. And so all of this discourse about preparing our kids, and I'm getting away from your question, but it's part of it for me, preparing our kids to compete, there's a much higher imperative for educating our children than competing. And I love the fact that we all in this room work in a sector that we are all learning from each other in all of these countries. I never get a feel from any of them that they're trying to beat us, except all this stuff gets published, like PISA and all these things that are just wrong on the math and silly, as Young points out, that lead to us into that thing, like we're trying to beat Mexico or this kind of thing. It's a shame. So we try to just bring it in. That's what we do. We say, bring it in here, bring it in here, bring it in here, right? And honor it.
So Liz or Betty, did either of you have any closing comments?
Just to go back to what you, oh wow, that was really loud. To go back to your question, we had a classroom who did a project in Lynn, Massachusetts, and the class, really a research project, a project-based project. They were looking in their community, they're like, what's something that's a problem for us in the community? And they realized cars idled in front of the school. You wouldn't think that's such a big deal, but they started doing research on the environment and the impact on the environment and the impact on the students, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And those kids ended up taking policy options to the state, and the state changed the idling policies around school. So you can only idle now for 5 seconds instead of 10. But spending time with those kids and getting them to realize that they are citizens of this world and that they have a voice and that they can make change, that's really what we have to help them do. What's their passion? Help them identify the tool sets that they need to go make change. Because when those kids realize that we can go change state policy, that's huge. That is not something we necessarily expect from a group of 6th graders. And then to be able to talk about that and hope that some other school says, huh, we could do a project like that. what are these kids' passions? They can change the world, and when those kids realize they can change the world, they're unstoppable.
Well, I would just say that I'm a first-generation American. Both my parents were born in other countries and came here with very limited education, not speaking a word of English. They never came to school. In fact, my father never, ever came to my school. He was too busy working until I graduated from high school. My whole career. And my mother rarely came. Part of the reason is she thought she'd embarrass me by their lack of education, because they had such reverence for teachers. They didn't want to speak badly for me that her parents weren't educated. But what they did was they drummed into me that education is the ticket to upward mobility. And I think when we talk about, parent involvement, it means parents are physically involved, or they're communicating a lot with the teacher, and there's a lot of ways for parents to be involved. And I feel so advantaged that my parents held teachers in high regard. God forbid if a teacher ever called home with a principal, I was a dead person, because that's how much reverence my parents had for teachers, for education. And I think it's still that way in Mexico. The teacher's second only to the priest of the village in the little towns in Mexico that I've visited. And I think parents need to be encouraged, as our student's parent did, to talk to him a lot about education, even though I suspect your father didn't come to school much, right? And he didn't appear physically, and your mom didn't have time because she's busy. They're both really busy working hard, hourly employees or whatever it is. They can't take time off. And I think we have to have a new view of parent involvement. And I hear so much denigration of, well, what do you expect me to do with this kid? The parent never shows up, or I call them, they never call me back. And I think it's important that we understand these cultural differences. I think it's very, very important that we not hold it against the child because the parent isn't physically involved. And I think we need to reach the parents to let them know the best thing you can do is what his parents did for him, is tell him that education is important. Drum that into your child. You don't have to show up at school. Just let your child know how important education is. And that's why I'm sitting here today, I think, as well as teachers who were incredibly supportive of me my whole career.
So I'd like to thank our panelists and know that the next thing on the agenda, besides a break, is a breakout where you'll have a chance to get up close and cozy with the folks on the stage and some of the presenters who've spoken today. So please join me in a round of applause appreciation for our panelists.